My name is Alexander, but everyone calls me Alex. My life, viewed from the outside, resembles a well-preserved old herbarium. Every leaf, every twig is carefully pressed onto thick paper, labeled with calligraphic handwriting, and shielded from dust and bustle beneath thin tissue paper. I work as a conservator in a historical library, and this order, this quiet meaningfulness of the past, has seeped from my profession into my daily life, my thoughts, my very essence. My apartment is also a kind of archive. Books arranged not alphabetically, but by era and my personal affections, African violets blooming on the windowsill demanding a strict watering schedule, the morning air scented with slowly brewed coffee and the fresh newspaper. I wasn't lonely, I was self-sufficient, or so I thought, until I met Lena. Lena burst into my ordered life like a sudden gust of wind through a wide-open window, scattering my neat sheets and filling the stale air with the scent of rain and ozone. We met in a ridiculously cliched way at a bookstore. I was looking for a rare edition of Tsvetaeva's Letters to Pasternak, while she stood by the contemporary fiction shelf, laughing so infectiously at a line in a book that I couldn't help but smile. She looked up at me, her eyes huge, the color of wet asphalt, sparkling with mischief, and said, completely unabashed, "Can you believe it? The main character here tells his girlfriend to cure her autumn blues by sniffing kittens. Genius, right?" I mumbled something in reply, probably about endorphins and pheromones, feeling like a dusty folio next to this glossy new pages-scented book. But she didn't retreat. We got talking. It turned out she was a landscape designer, creating beauty from chaos, the absolute opposite of my work, preserving beauty from the chaos of time. We left the store together that day and talked for 3 hours, wandering through old city streets. With Lena, it was easy. She didn't try to psychoanalyze me, didn't ask probing questions. She simply lived in the moment, delighted by a crooked alleyway, delicious ice cream, a funny dog being walked by an old lady. She was like a sunbeam that doesn't ask permission to jump onto your wall and illuminate a dark corner. Our first dates were like impressionist sketches, light, bright, full of air and fleeting impressions. We went to small art house cinemas, ate pizza sitting on a park curb, fed ducks at the park ponds. I told her about old book bindings and oak gall ink. She told me about selecting flowers for rock gardens and why Japanese maples are finicky in our climate. It seemed our worlds, so different, weren't colliding but complementing each other, creating something new and harmoniously surprising. I started noticing the violets on my windowsill blooming more profusely, the morning coffee tasting brighter. I was thawing. The herbarium of my soul was slowly coming alive, sending out new shoots. It was during this seemingly cloudless period that the name Stan first surfaced in our conversations. He was her best friend. Judging by Lena's stories, they'd been inseparable since high school. "Stan, he's just like that. He's my shoulder to cry on, my emergency service, my personal clown and therapist all in one," she'd say with warm, almost maternal tenderness. I listened to these stories and felt a faint, barely perceptible prick of anxiety, like a draft in a tightly sealed room. She mentioned him constantly. "Stan says that. Stan and I once." "We should have you meet Stan sometime. You'd totally get along." I, a man accustomed to analyzing texts and subtexts, saw something more than just friendship in this. Her voice, when she spoke of him, held notes of dependence, as if Stan wasn't just a friend but a necessary constant in the equation of her life, without which everything crumbled. He called her several times a day, and she, even if we were in the middle of the most fascinating conversation, always answered, her expression changing as she switched to a special chirpy language. These calls were short, full of inside jokes and hints, after which she'd return to me with a slightly guilty smile. "That was Stan. He's having another drama with his boss." I tried to dismiss my misgivings. After all, who was I to judge their friendship? I'd never had a friend like that. My relationships were always more distant, based on mutual respect for personal space. Their symbiosis seemed alien, incomprehensible to me, like an exotic plant whose care instructions I didn't know. One evening, sitting in a cafe, I shared plans for our vacation. I wanted to take her to see the White Knights, the drawbridges, wander the halls of the Hermitage. She listened dreamily, her eyes shining, and then her phone rang. "Stan," she whispered and answered. I saw her face darken. She spoke quickly into the phone, calming, persuading. Hanging up, she gave me a guilty look. "I'm so sorry. Stan's having problems again. His girlfriend, well, they had a huge fight. He's a mess, asking me to come over." I stayed silent. The evening was ruined, not because she was leaving, but because with one call, an outsider had shattered our fragile magic. She saw something in my face and hurried to add, "Don't get the wrong idea. This doesn't happen often. He's just really vulnerable right now. He has no one else but me." I nodded and paid the bill. That night I first felt the presence of a third person in our relationship, invisible but omnipresent. And this third wasn't a ghost from the past or a rival, but her best friend. A week later I decided it was time for a change. I invited Lena on a special date. Not to the park, not to the movies, but to an expensive, quiet restaurant with live music, white tablecloths, and soft lighting. I wanted to create a space for us where phone calls and other people's dramas couldn't penetrate. I wanted to show her our relationship was something valuable, requiring attention and respect. I booked a window table, bought a bouquet of her favorite freesias, and wore my best suit. She arrived, and my breath caught. She wore an elegant black dress that emphasized her fragility. Her hair was swept up, and tenderness shone in her wet asphalt eyes. "Alex, this is beautiful," she whispered, glancing around the room. "I've never been anywhere like this." We sat. I ordered wine. The pianist played Chopin. Everything was perfect. We talked about trivial things that felt like the most important matters in the world. Looking at her, I realized the herbarium of my soul hadn't just come alive, it had burst into wild, crazy bloom. And at that very moment, just as I was about to say something important, a figure appeared at our table. A tall, slightly slouched guy in jeans and a stretched-out T-shirt with some stupid slogan. He smirked at Lena. Well, look who decided to slum it with the bougie crowd. Getting a taste of the high life?" he said loudly, drawing attention from nearby tables. Lena jumped and turned, her face flushed. "Stan, what are you doing here?" "Just walking by," he said, shamelessly pulling a chair from a neighboring table and plopping down next to Lena. "Saw my Lena sitting here, bored stiff with some suit anti-dude. Figured I'd rescue her." He winked at me. I felt blood slowly rise to my face. Suit anti-dude. I was 34. He looked no older than 25. "Stan, stop it," Lena murmured, but her voice held no reproach, only a coquettish flutter. "Meet Alex." "Alex, this is Stan." I offered my hand. Stan gave it a lazy fingertip shake, his mocking gaze fixed on me. "Alexander, huh?" "Serious name." "For a serious man in a serious suit, in a serious restaurant." He turned to the waiter, who was staring dumbfounded, and snapped his fingers. "Hey, buddy, get me a beer. The cheapest swill you got. The smell of this fancy wine is going to give me hives?" Lena giggled. While this obnoxious jerk was wrecking our evening, she giggled. Not a nervous laugh, but genuine, as if he'd said something incredibly witty. "Stan, behave," she said, but immediately added, turning to me, "He's always joking like that. Don't mind him. He has this unique sense of humor. I looked at him and saw not humor, but naked aggression, a desire to humiliate, to show who was boss. He was like a stray dog marking its territory, and Lena was the territory. Then came hell. Stan hijacked our conversation, launching into shared stories filled with names I'd never heard and events I hadn't been part of. He talked loudly, gestured expansively, throwing superior glances my way. I became furniture. Lena, initially trying to include me, quickly gave up and focused entirely on him. They laughed, whispered, reminisced. I sat silently, drinking my wine, feeling cold fury boil inside me. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a performance, a power play. The climax came when the waiter brought our main courses. I had ordered steak. Stan, finishing his second beer, looked at my plate and said, "Ooh, bloody meat. Brutal." Just like in those mobster flicks. Lena, your Alex here isn't some wise guy, is he? That suit looks kinda suspicious. Lena laughed again. Stan, knock it off. You're embarrassing him. Why should he be embarrassed? Stan pressed on. A real man should be confident. Like me, for example. With that, he reached across the table with his fork towards my plate. Let me taste this rich boy grub. I instinctively moved my plate back. Don't, I said quietly but firmly. My voice was so cold even the pianist seemed to miss a beat. Stan froze for a second. The smirk slid off his face. He looked at Lena, then back at me. Then he did the final straw. He deliberately made an awkward sweeping gesture, with the hand holding his beer glass, and knocked it over, drenching my pants. Sticky, cold liquid soaked into the expensive fabric. Silence fell over the restaurant. Oops, my bad, Stan exclaimed with exaggerated remorse. Butterfingers. Getting old, I guess. But little devils danced in his eyes. He was pleased. He'd won. Lena jumped up, fumbling with napkins. Alex, honey, forgive him, please. It was an accident, really. Stan, you're so clumsy. I stood up slowly. I looked at the wet stain on my trousers, at Lena's flustered face, at Stan's triumphant mug. I pulled several large bills from my wallet and placed them on the table, covering the check with plenty to spare. Lena, I'll call you a cab, I said evenly. Wait, what about you? She asked, bewildered. We were. The evening is over. I cut her off, turned, and walked towards the exit without looking back. Behind me, I heard Stan's voice. Man, what a drama queen. Got his panties in a bunch. Lena, ditch this stiff. He's a total drag. I walked through the city night, the cold air cooling my anger, turning it into a heavy, leaden hurt. It wasn't about the ruined suit or the wasted money. It was about total, profound disrespect. And the worst part, Lena couldn't see it, or didn't want to. She was blind, deaf, living in a fantasy world where rudeness was called a unique sense of humor, and humiliation was a joke. At home, I changed and poured myself a whiskey. Half an hour later, Lena called. Her voice was tearful. Alex, why did you just leave like that? It was so rude. Stan is really upset. I stayed silent, letting her talk. He didn't mean to hurt you, honestly. He's just like that. He doesn't know any other way. He thinks if he doesn't tease someone, it means he doesn't care. It's his way of showing affection. Affection? My voice was unrecognizable, alien and raspy. Lena, he humiliated me all evening. He invaded our private space, insulted me, acted like he owned the place, and then deliberately ruined my clothes. All right in front of you, and you never stopped him. You laughed, but they were jokes. She almost shouted. You take everything too seriously. You have no sense of humor. Stan said you're just a snob and a drag. That's why you got upset. And you agree with him? I asked quietly. A pause. I don't know. But I know he's my best friend. And he didn't deserve how you treated him. You owe him an apology. An apology. I owed an apology to the person who trampled my evening, my dignity, my feelings for her, for not letting him wipe his feet on me completely. In that moment I understood everything, understood this couldn't be fixed. Her world revolved around Stan, and everyone else, including me, were just satellites in his orbit. Any attempt to leave that orbit was seen as betrayal. I won't apologize to him, Lena, I said calmly. What, but why? He's my friend. He's not my friend. And after tonight, I doubt he's your friend. Friends don't act like that. That's how manipulators and selfish people act, scared of losing their meal ticket. How can you say that? Her voice trembled with outrage. You don't even know him. You're just jealous. Yes, I am jealous, I agreed, but not of you for him. I'm jealous of your self-respect for your blindness. She hung up. I finished the whiskey and sat down. I'm a conservator. I work with fragile, damaged things. I know some stains can be removed, some tears glued, some faded colors restored. But I also know some damage is irreversible, when the structure of the material is compromised to its core. When mold has eaten the paper from within, any intervention only leads to complete destruction. My relationship with Lena was such a case. The structure was rotten, and that rot was named Stan. I could have simply vanished, blocked her number, retreated into my familiar shell. But something inside me protested, not for her sake, for mine. I needed closure, not an ellipsis, not a comma, but a bold final period. And I decided to teach her a lesson, not a cruel, vengeful one. A visual lesson, a lesson in conservation. I decided to show her what her friendship looked like from the outside, stripped of all filters and excuses. For the next 2 days I ignored her calls and messages, oscillating between pleas and accusations. I prepared. I called the restaurant, apologized for the incident, and requested the security camera footage, explained the situation, damage to expensive clothing, need for evidence for the cleaners. The manager, remembering the scene, obliged. By evening I had the file. I watched this silent film several times, without sound. It was even clearer. Here we were, Lena and I, leaning towards each other, smiling. Idyllic. Here he appeared abrupt, obnoxious. Here he sat down, breaking our geometry. Here Lena turned to him and I was left alone. Here he gestured expansively, while I sat like a statue. Here his hand, holding the glass, made a perfectly calculated, deliberate movement. Everything was crystal clear, a one-man show where I was the prop and Lena the rapt audience. Then I sat down to write her a letter, not an email, a real letter, on good thick paper, with my favorite fountain pen. It was the hardest thing I'd ever written. I didn't accuse or insult. I simply described. Dear Lena, forgive me for not responding. I needed time to think things through and organize my thoughts. I won't argue with you about who was right or wrong. I just want you to see something. See it not with your own eyes, clouded by years of habit, but with mine, the eyes of someone who grew very attached to you in a short time. I've enclosed a flash drive. It contains a short silent video. It's the security footage from that restaurant. Please watch it. But watch it not as a participant, but as an outside observer. Pay attention not to what is happening, but to how it's happening. Look at the body language. How we sat before he arrived, that's rapport, connection, the beginning of intimacy. See how his arrival physically ruptures our space. See how your body and gaze completely switch to him, leaving me out of frame. Notice his gestures wide, proprietorial, invasive. Mine restrained, closed. That's not because I'm a snob. It's a defensive reaction to aggression. Now the crucial part. Scroll to the beer incident. Look at the trajectory of his hand. That wasn't clumsiness, Lena. It was a calculated, precise movement. The target wasn't the glass. It was me. It was an act of symbolic humiliation, marking territory. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to trust your own eyes. Sound in this situation is just interference, white noise of excuses and jokes that obscures the essence. And the essence is simple. Your friend isn't protecting you. He's protecting his power over you. He doesn't rejoice in your happiness with someone else. He sees it as a threat to his comfort. Any man who enters your life will face the same attack, and you, time and again, will choose him because your loyalty to him is stronger than your instinct for self-preservation and respect for your partner. You demanded I apologize. That would be tantamount to admitting I have no right to my own boundaries, my own dignity. It would be a betrayal of myself. I can't do that, and I can't be in a relationship where I'm asked to do it. I bear you no ill will. You're a wonderful, bright person, like a sunbeam. But your sunbeam lives in a cage it mistakes for home, and the key to that cage is in the hands of your best friend, or perhaps in your own. I wish you happiness, Lena, sincerely. But our time together, alas, has ended. This herbarium proved too fragile. Alex, I put the letter and the flash drive in an envelope and sent it by courier. Sending it, I felt not relief, but emptiness. As if I'd amputated a part of myself, diseased, inflamed, but still a part. A week passed, then another. No response came. I didn't expect one. I slowly returned to my routine, rearranged my books, watered the violets on schedule, brewed morning coffee, But the silence in the apartment felt different. Before it was self-sufficient, now it was hollow. The scent of ozone and rain had faded, leaving only a memory. I worked, read, met with my few friends. Life went on, but some color had bled out of it. About 3 months passed. Autumn painted the city in crimson and gold. One evening, walking home from work, I decided to take a shortcut through the park where Lena and I had once eaten pizza on the curb. Walking through the rustling leaves, lost in thought, I suddenly saw her. She was sitting on our bench, alone. She wore a simple coat, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She didn't see me. She just watched the ducks swimming in the pond, and there were no sparks of mischief or carefreeness in her gaze, only a quiet, adult sadness. No one sat beside her, not Stan, not anyone. I froze behind a tree, not daring to approach. What could I say? "Hi, did my lesson work?" That would be crass and cruel. I just stood and watched, and in that moment I understood my lesson wasn't for her. It was for me, a lesson about not being able to fix what doesn't consider itself broken, a lesson that sometimes the most correct thing you can do is walk away to preserve the little that is still whole within yourself. She sat for another 10 minutes, then stood, wrapped her coat tighter, and slowly walked down the path. She didn't look back. I turned and walked towards my quiet apartment, my books and my violets. That evening I sat by the window for a long time, looking at the night city. The emptiness inside hadn't gone away, but it was no longer hollow. It had become calm, like the surface of an autumn pond reflecting distant stars. The herbarium of my soul would never be the same. On one of its pages remained a permanent mark, the imprint of a sunbeam that had glanced into my dark room and vanished, leaving behind not just light, but the bitter knowledge of human fragility and the boundaries that cannot be crossed. By anyone. Ever. Autumn gave way to winter. The city was blanketed in snow, muffling sounds and colors. My life returned to its quiet, ordered harbor, but something had irrevocably changed. Where I once found peace and self-sufficiency in my routine, now it felt like the silence after a storm, deafening, full of echoes of what was gone. The calm autumn pond I'd thought of in the park had frozen over, covered by thick ice under which the movement of hidden life was barely discernible. I continued restoring old books, touching fragile pages, inhaling the scent of dust and time. But now, in every binding, in every time-yellowed letter, I sensed a story not about the past, but the present, about cracks that can't be glued and stains that sink into the soul. I didn't seek encounters or expect news. Lena vanished, dissolved into the vast city as she should have. I convinced myself it was for the best. My lesson was an act of self-respect and self-preservation. Like a surgeon, I'd amputated the diseased part to save the whole. But at night, when a blizzard howled outside, I felt phantom pain where that sunbeam, that gust of fresh wind, had once been. I asked myself questions. Had I been too cruel? Was there cold, almost sadistic arrogance in my act? That letter, that flash drive? I, a man living among dead letters and dried bindings, had presumed to be an expert on living souls. I'd passed judgment, staged a demonstration, and retreated, basking in my righteousness. This thought burned within me, mixing the bitterness of loss with the acrid taste of shame. Life, however, has a way of throwing plots no novelist could invent. One day in late January, I received an unusual conservation request. It was a collection of Andersen's fairy tales published before the Revolution. The book was badly damaged, the binding frayed, several pages torn out, and one illustration of Thumbelina sailing on a lily pad was stained with something dark, like tears mixed with dirt. I set to work. Carefully, millimeter by millimeter, I cleaned the image. As the grime lifted, revealing delicate watercolor hues, the image of Lena surfaced in my memory. Her delight in simple things, her naivety, her fragility. She too was like this Thumbelina, sailing through a vast, not always friendly world on her little leaf. And who was her companion? The toad who wanted to marry her off to her ugly son. Or the field mouse offering a full but dull existence underground? And who was I in this fairy tale? The beetle who kidnapped her only to abandon her because she didn't suit his society. I worked on the book for several days, and the metaphor wouldn't let me go. I realized my herbarium wasn't just an archive. It was my way of hiding from life, from its unpredictability and pain. I preferred dealing with the past because it was settled, safe. Lena had embodied the present alive, chaotic, demanding not analysis but participation. And I'd been afraid of that participation. The evening I almost finished restoring Thumbelina, returning her to her original purity, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered reluctantly, expecting a telemarketer. "Alexander?" asked an unfamiliar female voice, tired and lifeless. "Yes, speaking." "My name is Marina. I'm a nurse at the hospital." "Elena gave me your number. Sorry, I don't remember her last name. She asked me to call you. If you can, please come. She's alone here, completely exhausted." The world tilted. The ice on the pond of my soul cracked, and cold water gushed out. "What's wrong with Lena?" "What happened?" I asked, feeling my heart plummet. "Lena's fine," came the reply. "It's her friend, Stanislaw. Critical condition. Car accident. Lena's been here almost non-stop for 3 days. She didn't ask me to call anyone, but I see she needs help. She's about to collapse." The nurse dictated the ward number. Without thinking, I dropped everything and drove to the hospital. The hospital met me with its usual smell, bleach, medicine, and human suffering. I found the ward. In the dimly lit corridor, on a hard plastic chair, sat Lena. If not for the familiar coat, I might not have recognized her. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, her hair tangled and her wet asphalt gaze empty, staring at a point on the opposite wall. She wasn't crying. There was nothing in her but endless, burnt-out exhaustion. I approached and sat quietly beside her. She didn't notice me at first. Then she slowly turned her head, her eyes focusing on my face. No surprise, only a faint, barely perceptible flutter of her lashes. "Alex?" She whispered so softly I barely heard. "Hi," I said. "They called me." She nodded. "That nurse, Marina. Kind woman. I didn't ask her to. What happened?" She spoke slowly, haltingly, as if each word cost her the last of her strength. "Stan. Driving home from friends late at night, drunk, crossed the center line. Thankfully, no one in the other car was seriously hurt, but he, broken bones, head injury, internal bleeding, had been in a coma, was conscious now, but still critical. His parents lived out of state, couldn't come right away, would be there tomorrow, and besides her, he had no one here. I listened, feeling no schadenfreude or satisfaction at being right. I felt only immense, overwhelming pity. For her. For that idiot lying behind the ICU door. For our story, so stupidly and absurdly cut short. "Have you eaten?" I asked. She shook her head. "Come on, I'll get you coffee and something to eat. I can't leave him. I'll sit here. 5 minutes won't change anything." She gave me a long, searching look, as if trying to understand why I was there, then slowly stood and shuffled towards the cafeteria. I remained in the corridor, looking at the closed ICU door. Behind it lay the man I'd hated, the man who'd destroyed the fragile thing beginning between Lena and me. But now I felt no hatred. I felt emptiness. This obnoxious, arrogant guy, this master of his universe, was as mortal and vulnerable as anyone. His unique sense of humor hadn't saved him from a collision with reality at highway speed. Lena returned with a trembling plastic cup of coffee. She took a sip and seemed to revive a little. We sat in silence. In hospital corridors, silence isn't oppressive. It's natural, woven from waiting, fear, and hope. "Thank you for coming," she said finally. "Don't mention it. I didn't know who else to call. I mean, I didn't want to call anyone. But Marina. She saw your name in my phone. In favorites. I forgot to delete it. In favorites. Me, whom she hadn't seen in almost 4 months. It felt like a stab to the heart. "I watched that video," she suddenly said, staring straight ahead. "That same night. Watched it many times. Without sound. Like you said." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "It was terrifying. Seeing myself from the outside, seeing how pathetic and blind I was. You were right. About everything. In every word of your letter. I read it and felt like my skin had been ripped off. It hurt, but for the first time in years I started breathing." She pulled a crumpled envelope from her bag. "My envelope. I carry it with me, as a reminder." "What happened then?" I asked softly. "I tried to talk to him, to Stan, tried to explain it. Couldn't go on like this. That I needed my own space, that I wanted to build my own life." At first he laughed, said I'd been reading too many women's magazines and listening to my sugar daddy nerd. Then he got angry, yelled that I was betraying him, that I was ungrateful. We had a huge fight. I didn't speak to him for almost a month. It was the calmest month I'd had in 10 years. I even signed up for that landscape design course I'd always dreamed about. She gave a bitter smile. And then he called, drunk, screaming into the phone that I'd abandoned him, that he was worthless, that he was getting in his car right now, and well, she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Awkwardly, I put a hand on her shoulder. I had no words of comfort. Any words seemed false and out of place. I was simply there, and my silent presence seemed the only thing I could offer. I spent the next few days with her. Stan's parents arrived bewildered, grief-stricken people who looked at Lena as if she were a saint. I took on some tasks. Talked to doctors, picked up prescriptions, brought food. I didn't do it to win her back. I did it because I couldn't not. I saw a person pushed to their limit, and my inner conservator couldn't stand aside. Only this time, I wasn't trying to fix an old book but a living soul, and I understood my tool's logic. Analysis, detachment were useless here. All I had was patience and silent empathy. We barely spoke about us. Our past seemed distant, almost unreal, like a dream remembered only in fragments. We talked about the doctor's prognosis, the paperwork needed for insurance, the weather outside. In these simple, mundane conversations, there was more closeness than in our most romantic dates. We weren't a man and a woman. We were two people fate had thrown together in an extreme situation, and in this new role I felt surprisingly at ease. My calm, ordered nature became a lifeline in this chaos of pain and fear. One evening, sitting in the nearly empty hospital cafeteria, Lena suddenly said, "You know what I realized? Your lesson did work, but not how you probably expected." I looked at her questioningly. "You showed me my cage. I saw its bars. I saw the lock. But you couldn't know that I wasn't just afraid of the cage. I was afraid of freedom. Stan. He was my constant problem, my cross to bear. Taking care of him, solving his endless dramas made me feel needed. It was easier than dealing with my own life, my own fears and desires. And when I tried to leave, he almost killed himself. And I realized I can unlock that cage, but I can't walk out. Not now." "You aren't responsible for him, Lena," I said gently. "He's an adult." "I know," she nodded. "I know it here." She tapped her temple. "But here," she placed a hand over her heart, "it's different. How can I abandon him when he's like this? Helpless, broken, maybe when he's back on his feet." She didn't finish. We both knew that maybe might never come. His dependence on her was as strong as her dependence on needing to save him. It was a vicious circle, a symbiosis of two unhealthy souls. Stan improved. He was moved from the ICU to a regular room. I saw him once dropping off a bag of things. He lay pale, thin, tangled in tubes, staring at the ceiling. His eyes held none of their former arrogance or mockery, only pain and confusion. He saw me, and something like shame flickered across his face. He turned to the wall. Silently, I put the bag on the bedside table and left. My mission was over. His parents were there, taking on the main burden. My presence was no longer necessary. I felt it was time to retreat back into the shadows. On our last evening, Lena and I walked through the snow-covered park near the hospital. Light snow fell, lamps cast long shadows on the drifts. "Thank you, Alex," she said, stopping. "I don't know what I would have done these past days without you. You saved me. You're strong. You'd have managed," I replied. "No." I was at my limit. You showed up exactly when I needed you. Like a quiet guardian angel. She smiled her old sunny smile, but sadness lingered in her eyes. "I'm leaving," she said suddenly. I froze. "Where?" "With him first. He's being transferred to a rehab center near the city. His parents asked me to go with them, at least for a while. And then, I don't know. I applied to the School of Landscape Architecture. I've wanted to for ages. Maybe it'll work out." That's good," I said, feeling simultaneous joy for her and the bitterness of parting. "That's the right decision. I need to change something, radically. Otherwise I'll drown in this swamp." She looked me in the eye. "Alex, I'll always be grateful to you. For everything. For that letter. For these days. You showed me relationships can be different. Not a battle, not a rescue mission, but quiet support. Like the strong, reliable binding of an old book." She stepped towards me and for a moment pressed her cheek against my cold coat. It wasn't a lover's embrace, but a farewell gesture. From a close friend. "Goodbye, Alex the conservator," she whispered. "Goodbye, Lena the sunbeam," I replied. She stepped back, turned, and walked quickly down the path without looking back. I watched her until her figure dissolved in the snowy haze. I returned to my apartment. The silence no longer felt hollow or jarring. It felt meaningful. I went to my work desk. The restored book of fairy tales lay there. I opened it to the page with Thumbelina. She sailed on her leaf across clear, transparent water towards new shores. I understood that some fairy tales don't end with a wedding to an elf prince. Sometimes a happy ending is simply the chance to sail away from toads and moles and begin your own journey. Spring passed. Summer arrived. I worked a lot, started a complex new project restoring antique maps. Life flowed on, steady and calm. Lena's image gradually faded, becoming a bright but distant memory. One morning, sorting through the mail, I saw a postcard. It showed a Japanese maple in a garden, its lacy leaves ablaze with crimson shades. On the back, a few words were written in a familiar, slightly sprawling hand. "Hi, I'm doing well. I'm studying. It's incredibly interesting. Stan is recovering. He's with his parents. Thank you for teaching me the difference between an herbarium and a real garden. Hugs, Lena." I looked at the postcard for a long time. The herbarium of my soul. It was still in place, but now I knew its pages weren't just dried specimens of the past. Each one held the memory of a living flower, and one, the brightest, held the memory of a sunbeam who taught me that even the most hopeless damage can sometimes be repaired, not with glue or patches, but with quiet, patient human warmth. I placed the postcard inside the Andersen fairy tale book, on the page with Thumbelina. And for the first time in a long while, I felt not just calm but peace, a deep, quiet peace within my own soul.